this episode of the Iamblichus Reading Group, we investigate the role of conscience in occult practices. Do we invoke the spirits for personal gain, or is there a higher purpose we should keep in mind? We also look at evil and what entities draw us in that direction. Is evil the lack of knowledge of the right thing, or is it a metaphysical reality equal to the good? Finally, we begin to ask what the purpose of occult praxis could be, if it's not for personal gain. Hi everyone, thanks for joining the October 31st version of the Iamblichus Reading Group, and today we have Matt and Ryan on. And Ryan, last time we were talking about a subject which I thought we could take up at the beginning of this meeting and see how long it plays out, and then move on perhaps to the planets, but there's certainly no hurry. So if you wanted to continue with what you were bringing up, which I thought was really interesting.
We were talking about discernment and safety when working with, I guess we'll call them extra-human entities. How do you know how to protect yourself from undue influence, I think, how to kind of best move towards the correct things, I suppose. And yeah, I think that like the word that we ended off on, that Farzana brought up, was this idea of discernment and like knowing what exactly it is we are interacting with. I think that this is like a really important, aspect to this, kind of irregardless of whether you like believe in the reality as such of these entities, because obviously, bringing these things into your life, bringing these energies into your life can have some pretty, I would say, severe impacts. Yeah, so where I was coming from when I was talking about that, and I actually really loved what Farzana was talking about kind of centering yourself. I've been thinking about this a lot this past week, so I can kind of like articulate what exactly it was I was talking about last week. And I think the idea of your, not consciousness, but like your conscience is a very good place to start here. What is your consciousness? What is your conscience telling you about what it is you're doing? I think that like that aspect of conscience, oh my goodness, it's a hard word to say, is so important in allowing us to get a sense of what it is we're interacting with. Because like I said last week, I think that there are things that we do, and this doesn't even necessarily have to relate to anything metaphysical. This can just be about what are we doing in our day-to-day life, and like what energies are we bringing into ourselves, that we all kind of know at the end of the day what is right. Like, I think that is, I stand by that idea very strongly. And allowing yourself to be guided by that conscience, that like, I guess heart would probably be the word that Iamblichus uses. It allows us to, really drill down on what it is we're working with and how we are able to interact with it. And I do think that there are times when like you got to go with your gut. You know what I mean? It's like, no, this is not what I want. This is not what I thought this was going to be. And you need to be able to disengage yourself from that, because I think it's really easy to allow these things to draw you in deeper, kind of unbeknownst to you sometimes. So keeping your heart, keeping your center focused on the one, I think, is a really good place to start when we're starting to deal with, ritual contact, or not even necessarily ritual, just contact with these extra human things. I think that's like a good place to start it. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts right off the bat there. I can definitely go more if you know, but yeah.
No, I think that's a great place to start with it, because I think it also relates very directly to what Iamblichus says about the beings that you would want to contact for theurgy anyway, where he basically talks about all of these levels of being, or levels of beings, as like levels of similarity to, or levels of connection with sort of the one, which is also considered, because this is Platonism, automatically the good. And so, it starts out being like, well, it's nothing metaphysical. I just need to follow my heart. I just need to follow my gut. I just need to do what I know is right. But actually, in some ways, that's also like the highest metaphysical truth, is like that you have the ability to choose one way or the other, that you have the ability to direct yourself one way or another, and that relative to you, like directing yourself one way or another can be directing yourself closer to this sort of, to the one, to the good, to the way that that's manifesting in your life.
Away from that.
Yeah, or away from that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I will say, I think something that complicates it, though, is that, and if I were to try and Iamblichus it up, I might say, because we are in a realm of space and time, because we are in this sort of physical temporal world, things can get kind of twisty, and sometimes like if you imagine like a really complicated knot, there's like a massive string, and then you kind of have the end of the string that's sticking out. And in that circumstance, it might seem like, oh, well, easy. I have to go away from the big massive string. But sometimes to untie the knot, you actually have to make that hanging piece of string go into the massive string and go through it and pop out the other side, to untie the knot, because of the way that it's already been twisted around. So I think that the general principle is right, but sometimes in practice it might look a little counterintuitive, because you might have to get through some ugliness before you can pop out the other side where it's clear what to do.
That's actually a really great point, and it's something that I've been like kind of parsing this week over, like I said, as I've been thinking about this particular issue, because, and this maybe lies in a little bit of, I don't know, misunderstanding's the right word, but like tension in the idea of the one as presented by the Neoplatonists. And Chaz, you just said Matt, you just said that the one vis-a-vis the good, right? Now, I just honestly, I'm interested in your guys' opinion on this. Is the one the good, or is the one the all?
Well, the good is, it gets a little bit dicey, but the good is above everything. So the good is kind of the one, but the good also kind of transcends the one, because everything comes from the good.
Right, and that's,
so we reach oneness so that we can take, participate in the good and become good in some way.
Right, and I think that exactly is where my, I guess, tension lies, because on an intellectual level, I understand that. But when I'm actually practicing things, there are times when that center, that conscience, like I was saying, directs me towards things that I don't necessarily see as being reflective of the good. Perhaps they are reflective of the all, right? And I know people love to hate on the Kabbalion, you know what I mean? It's not real Hermetica. It was, early 1900s, whatever. But I think that there is some there with that work in presenting the center, not necessarily just as the good, but as the all. Because I think it's just a bit more intuitive when you say, Matt, that the analogy of the knot, you know what I mean? There is struggle and there is pain that you have to get through in order to ascend. You know what I mean? Now, I don't necessarily think that relates very strongly to lower beings, as we were talking about last week and as at the start of this session. But in that forward-looking approach and that upward-looking approach, I guess, it just brings up that question. You know what I mean? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it because I find it slightly counterintuitive sometimes.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I like the metaphor of the knots as well. The famous psychologist R.D. Laing wrote a book called Knots, and used that as a metaphor for how we have to work through all of our problems. He was also famous for stating that insanity is actually a process by which one is attempting to become sane. And so he encouraged people to become insane, or at least to go through their insanities. So I like that, and I think it fits in with Iamblichus's and the Neoplatonist idea that we are fallen, we are impure, we have to pure ourselves or purify our souls, which have been, made impure by materiality and all of these material things. And then how do we, and what I hear from you, Ryan, is, well, how can we actually even make the start? We have to follow our heart, we have to follow our conscience, which is, at least maybe in a Neoplatonic sense, is our our guardian spirit, our guardian daimon. Follow the daimon. Know thyself. And so that is the beginning, but I also think that there are other ways that the gods are reaching out to us. And those include oracles, dreams, and omens, and which fits into kind of where this Neoplatonism in some ways, at least in terms of theurgy, began with Porphyry and his philosophy of omens, his philosophy of the oracle. That we do, there is somehow another source of truth which is trying to communicate with us.
I also think that just to go back to the more direct contradiction, apparent contradiction between the Neoplatonic good and saying how does everything come from the good? Basically, the problem of evil. How does everything come from the good? If there's evil, if I notice that there's bad stuff, it weakens my sort of faith in or understanding of the idea that things can come from the good. And I don't think that those two things are actually, but they have to be thought of as contradictory. And one of the things that I always think of is a passage from a Socratic dialogue, and I'm notoriously bad at remembering which one is which, so I'm not even going to try. But there is a Socratic dialogue in which Socrates asks somebody, basically point blank, "Do you think there's evil?" In his oh, I don't know, I'm just asking questions way, in which he clearly has an answer that he thinks, but he wants to get the other person to say it. So he asks the person, "So, do you think there's evil?" And the guy goes, "Well, of course. Yeah, I could be walking down the street." This is a very loose paraphrase. "I could be walking down the street and someone could mug me." And Socrates basically says, "Okay, and so you think that's evil?" And the guy says, "Well, yes. And so you think that the guy who mugged you was doing evil?" yes, yes. And he was doing it intentionally. Oh, yes. So he intentionally wanted evil. And the guy's like, oh, yes. Socrates says, well, do you think he mugged you to be evil? And the guy goes, no, well, he did it because he wanted my money. Oh, okay. So if the guy mugs you because he wants your money, is wanting money evil in itself? He used a different analogy, but this is my retelling.
Yeah.
And the guy says, well, oh, maybe not. Oh, I don't know. And so Socrates says, so are you really sure that people want evil? And the guy goes, well, I suppose people don't really want evil for their own sake. They want something else. And he says, oh, yes. And so when they do evil, do they really want evil? Oh, well, no. And so Socrates says, okay, so basically everybody who ever does evil, they're only doing it out of ignorance. Yeah. They want the good, but out of ignorance, out of their fallenness, they happen to do evil in their flailing attempts to get there. And I guess this comes back to the whole the not image. There are ways in which you can hold both the idea of good and the concrete occurrence of evil in the world at the same time, by thinking in this sort of Socratic way that, well, the causes of evil were not initiated for the sake of doing evil. They were started for some other reason and happened to do evil on their way. And this is kind of... that was talking about people anyway.
But isn't Socrates left with the question, well, then how do I... If I'm brought up, let's say, in an environment where evil is considered to be the good, how do I find my way out of that evil? And if I believe that doing something bad is actually my good, how do I find my way out of that? And let me just for just the sake of argument, that what Iamblichus is perhaps saying is that one of the ways out of that is that we are being communicated with by other powers or other entities who want us to perform the good. And I think, Socrates also, certainly the Neoplatonists are taking off from Socrates in the notion of his daimon, which he says guided him throughout his life. And the daimon is telling him, or is in a later phase in terms of the French Enlightenment and rationalism, the daimon is reinterpreted as conscience, but that's still a pretty good interpretation of what the daimon is.
Yeah, and I think so. I think that if we take this Socratic idea that like everybody starts out wanting the good, but they get all twisted up, basically due to ignorance, essentially, and that gets them to become evil, kind of as a means.
Sure, but what if it's not the crux of the problem with Socrates and, let's say, an existentialist is it's not about knowledge at all. It's about experience. If I grow up in an environment where all I experience is people committing, I don't know if you saw, I'm thinking of a film, one of the hip hop films, and I forget the exact name of it. It wasn't, it was where the kid was brought up in an environment where his father was a junkie and a dealer and everything, and murder was actually a way of life almost. And then he asked himself, well, how could I ever find my way out of this? Because for me, all of those things were the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
How do I find my way? And that's an experience. Is that knowledge?
Well, yeah, I guess it wouldn't be knowledge in an academic way. It might be knowledge, but it might be knowledge of the one in some way. Like it might be kind of finding, you could consider it, maybe the word knowledge is loaded and the word ignorance is loaded.
Well, what do we mean by knowledge? I mean, if we think of it in terms of rationalistic sense.
No, not that sense.
Yeah. Knowledge in a different way, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think we'd have to if we wanted to use that word to mean whatever this is. I guess we could use the Greek word and say gnosis.
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much agree with everything that's said, but I just want to inject one kind of wrench in that line of reasoning, and I think that it relates pretty well to how we started the conversation. And yes, and again, I think that conscience reflects this very well in that, there's that outside influence that's pushing you towards the one. But I also do think that there are additional, I guess, outside consciousnesses that might be directing us otherwise. And I'll use an example. A while back, I was trying to practice a particular ritual that was meant to, it was meant to help me materially, meant to help in my career. And again, as I said before, I don't know if I was doing that in what I would consider to be an entirely safe way. Like, I didn't have my conscience on the one. I didn't purify myself in the right way. And I think that kind of opened me up to not like more unsavory things than I would have liked to have been interacting with. And there was actually great success that came from this. I was able to, I would say that it was maybe imparted upon me, but, I had a very good idea for, a business for myself to, do this. And it was one that I was able to create contacts with, I have a degree in military strategy and security studies, and it was in that realm of things. And as I got talking, and so I have quite a wide network in that side of the world. And as I kind of went down this path, as I kind of rationalized what this would look like, how we were able to make money doing this, how we were able to make this business profitable, I just realized more and more that this did not come from a pure place. This did not come from a good place. And I rationalized that as no, this came from something else. That thing that I was in contact with that allowed for these ideas to present themselves in me, again, in my own mind. It wasn't about ascension. It was about materiality, and it was about dragging others into materiality, if I'm being honest with you. Yeah. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but these memories can be rather evocative, I suppose. But yeah, I think that that experience kind of suggested to me that those external influences can also present themselves to draw us down. Now, why that is, I struggle with, because the ascension aspect, it's fairly easy to rationalize why your guardian daimon would want you to ascend. You know what I mean? But why would something else want that other stuff? Why would something else want the negative stuff? And again, I don't have an answer to that question, but it is something that I have experienced, which leads me to believe that, like I say, we do have to be careful at the very least when we're interacting with these things. Yeah, again, I don't know. I don't really have an intelligent point to make about that. I just kind of wanted to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah. I think one of the pithiest pieces of occult advice I've ever heard is you don't need to trust somebody just because they don't have a body. But to
That's a good one, yeah.
but to the other points about what do they get out of it? I think that if we just because I think that the general line of reasoning that no one starts out wanting the bad, for lack of a better term. Nobody starts out wanting evil for its own sake necessarily, as far as I have found anyway. Things that think they want evil for its own sake actually want something else, or it's a means to something else generally. I would like to think of to offer another analogy, which is if we imagine that you have a broken bone, and like imagine you kind of break your arm, and it's a fracture where you're sort of look at your forearm or something, and it's like going straight, and there's a break, and then it is angled off in the wrong direction. In order to heal that arm, you would have to take the broken part and realign it to the rest of your arm. You'd have to like take it and just kind of manipulate the bone physically until it's straight again. Then you can put it in a cast or a stint or whatever, and hopefully it'll grow back together. But the entire time you're doing that, it's going to hurt like hell. It's actually going to be excruciatingly painful. And if we take the long view that maybe the way that these different beings are experiencing good and evil and their own moral choices and what they want, they could be in the appearance of evil could come from, if you buy this line of reasoning, the bone straightening phase of things. And that bone straightening phase of things could last countless lifetimes. There could be a 50,000 year continuous period where an entire class of beings is like in the excruciating pain phase of the process. And from our point of view, from our little human lifetime perspective, that would seem like absolute evil, because it's evil that just takes so long to work itself out that it's going to seem like it's eternal. But
see, that's the Plotinian way of looking at evil, is that we just don't have the big picture view of everything, and if we saw it, we would be able to see how it all fits into a plan, or into how the one is supposed to unfold itself in time and eternity. I guess it's a very difficult concept, I think, for a lot of people to accept, even if they were to accept their inability to comprehend the universal in that way, or the transcendent in that way. It's still, at least for me anyway, it's still difficult for me to think that there's anything that could or would want to see something like, let's say, the Holocaust, or the Gulag Archipelago, and everything that went on in those events to fit into some harmonious plan of good.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bone straightening analogy, if you could do it without, like, it's almost like saying, sorry, I should have thought about my wording before I started speaking.
No, that's fine.
I think that, like, just because the pain happens on the way to something else doesn't necessarily mean that the pain is part of the plan or is good. It's not like the pain is, it's not like, oh, we're going to put you in pain and you'll realize that the pain happened for a reason later. The pain didn't really happen for a reason. The pain was a byproduct of the bones crunching together. But the bones crunching together was a byproduct of another process which was happening. But it's not to say that the pain was good, or that the pain was healing, or that the pain was desirable, even to the one who's straightening out the bone.
I mean, like, just jumping off that, like, to use your example of, like, the Holocaust and the gulags, like, that is ultimately where we got the concept of human rights from. And it's what allowed for broader European society to remain connected. And I got to be careful here, because I feel like I'm getting into dangerous territory, especially since these things are posted online. But yeah, like I very much see what you're saying, Matt, about the pain as a byproduct rather than, or it's a means, not an end, I guess. Or I don't know even if it is a means. I don't know if it's like the pain itself that allows for that. But yeah, it's definitely part of the, like, straightening of the bone, so to speak. You know what I mean? Yeah, no, I like that way of thinking about it. It's definitely expansionary. You know, it adds a broader understanding to, especially when we're looking at things like, you know, history and how humans interact with one another. I think that it gives us a little bit of more explanatory power at the very least. And I mean, again, I think that it does also perhaps explain why those, I guess, lower entities, lower things might be interested in it. Because again, like if we're going to say that God is all, the one is reflective of everything, like I have a hard time dissociating that idea and then saying, but these things are not part of the one, right? Like that doesn't, I don't know if that tracks, personally at least.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing, is that if you're going to make a hard dualism where there are some things, if it's like if the one is good and all things are part of the one, then you have to come up with some way that you have to like be able to understand how that could be. Or you can say the one is not good and maybe the evil stuff is part of it too. Or you would have to say some things are not part of the one. And out of those options, that third one is like probably the hardest one to swallow, because then it wouldn't be called the one, it would be the two.
Or you could say that there's something radically evil in the world.
Yeah, but then the one wouldn't be the one, it would only be partial.
True, but then, I mean, you know, if there's a dichotomy at the heart of existence, I think there would be some people willing to accept that.
Definitely.
Oddly enough, I actually see both perspectives.
Well, I mean, let me return to your point though about these entities, for example, and then I wanted to kind of also get to what I thought you wanted to say last time, which was that relative to occult practices as people are now experiencing them, you found that there were some disappointing things or disheartening things going on. But as far as entities, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm willing to accept the fact that entities want evil for the sake of evil.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's like that's kind of the core of it, isn't it? You know, like sometimes, and I always say this when I'm talking to people about like occultism broadly, is that like sometimes thinking about the why is just going to drive you crazy. You just have to accept that it is and move on, you know, because we are not capable of understanding everything. But yeah, just want to go into a little bit more detail about what you were talking about, like vis-a-vis occult practice.
Me?
Yeah. Well, you said you wanted to circle back, yeah.
Well, I thought that's what you were saying last time. That's what we ended with last time. That you felt that in some way that current occult practices
Yes.
were giving into less
totally
reputable.
And I think a lot of that is cultural, to be perfectly honest with you, rather than like based in any of the theories or ideologies that like underpin modern occultism. But I would say, we have to like think about the type of person that is interested in the occult. B, I think we have to, and I think this is probably the most important thing, we have to talk about the relationship with Christianity. And not only Christianity, but like Christian society as a whole. And what Christian society considers to be the good. And then I also do think that we need to talk about the motivations. I think these are all like important elements to that whole idea. So the first, to touch on the first point, the sort of person that is interested in the occult, I think that there's two main types of people. The first one is, I would say, probably what all of us are, and that is the seeker. You know what I mean? The person who's interested in ascension, who's interested in higher knowledge and the ability to use that higher knowledge in their own life. And I do not have a problem with that. Or, like, obviously, I see that as a valuable thing. But then I also see a lot of people getting into this who have, and especially, and like, I think this is especially relevant in spaces that deal with magic rather than theurgy. More like goetic magic. Like I've told you before, like chaos magic is a big part of my own practice, and I would personally classify that as more goetic rather than theurgic. So if you are getting into the occult for goetic practice, especially if you've done a few rituals, if you've done a few things and you're like, oh, this works, I think that will drive that sort of occultist towards, I would call it the left-hand path, like the path of the material, the path of self-love. So there's that. Second point, Christianity and the kind of like relationship that society has with it. I think a lot of the people who are interested in occultism do so on the basis of opposition to Christianity and to like Christian monotheistic frameworks, Abrahamic frameworks, perhaps. And I think that, like, I'm not a Christian theologian or anything. I've read the Bible a couple times, but like I don't have, I went to church growing up and stuff, but I really don't have like that core super in-depth understanding of the theology behind it. But I do think that the Christian God is quite reflective of the good, as it were, And if you are someone who has a personality that wants to push back against that, I think that it will drive you kind of inherently into the interaction with like lower beings. Because again, I think a lot of people, and if I'm being totally honest with you, I'm speaking about this from my own experience, is that like, to put it quite flippantly, monotheism's kind of lame. You know what I mean? Like there is like this if you can understand the idea that there's this highly populated cosmos, there's like many entities that you have the ability to contact, it will push you towards trying to contact those things. And again, like when we talk about, like I started out with the Lesser Key of Solomon, and I would say that like in my experience with that, most of those entities, I obviously haven't got through all 72, but almost to a T, those entities give me that icky feeling that I was talking about last week. So if that's the framework that you're operating under,
that was the comment that got me thinking, was that you were saying the ickiness. And then you raised it up a level by talking about conscience. But I wonder whether we can go back to the ickiness which you were talking about.
Yeah, totally.
Because I have not. Let me say, icky. Yeah, icky, terrified is my experience in certain.
And you see, I actually wanted to bring this up with you based on that, because I remember you talking about the particular one, like negative, I guess, entity that you've experienced was the desire for like extinguishing that, like pure. I think pure death,
pure extinction. Yeah, it was.
Is
exactly.
is the terminology that you use.
Pure spiritual, physical extinction.
Yeah, and that really hasn't necessarily been the case with me when I've been like interacting with these things. It's been much less all-encompassing. It's been much more about specific aspects of life. And again, if I'm being totally honest, a lot of it has to do with like materiality, wealth generation, social standing, like these sorts of things. And like, it's so hard to describe, but again, like, I will have had experiences that excite me. You know what I mean? They're like, oh man, this is real. You know, this, it gives you that, like, lights a fire under your butt a little bit. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this is what I was looking for. You know what I mean? But once you get beyond the excitement of it and the fact that, like, yeah, I just did this myself. I committed a successful ritual. Mm. There's like a feeling of emptiness, so like sinking. I have found that comes along with it. And then when you really look and think about like why you were doing that ritual, what that ritual is driving you towards, I do think that that's where like the conscious comes in. Because it just, it's hard to describe it any other way that I have, but like you just know on a certain level, like, no, this is not right. This is not good.
Was it like the instant gratification of it has passed?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Whereas it didn't raise you up or give you the notion that there was an up.
Exactly. And like I think last week that I brought up the idea of like using ritual as a sort of like fully atomized point by point practice where you are just focusing on the ritual and the outcome, rather than the ritual and the outcome in the context of something broader, in the context of a journey of ascension. I think that is a big part of where the problem comes from. Yeah. Because as I've said before, I think it's a lot easier to interact with the lower than the higher.
And yeah, kind of, I haven't done the Ars Goetia. I've kind of stayed away from it on purpose for similar reasons to that. And for other reasons too, though, which is that I find that it's totally possible to accomplish material goals from a slightly higher level of, or by interacting with a slightly higher level of entity. Not to say I'm on a higher level, but that the other entity is on a higher level. But I will say, the way that they seem to do it is, in my experience, has been different. And the primary difference seems to be that the higher you go, the more holistic and contextualized, and the more that broader vision that you were kind of alluding to, Ryan, is present and is part of the way that the result comes about. And kind of the lower you go, or the sort of denser or more earthly you go, the more specific and less contextualized it seems to be. To the point where
you're laying down exactly what I'm picking up.
Nice. But there is a dance here, though. I think there is a trade-off a little bit, because if you try to go as high as possible and whatever, pray to God or work with an archangel or something, like sometimes the most holistic way to get something is that like it's going to take so long that you're not going to get it. It's sort of like you can ask a kind of a being on a slightly lower level to get you a job, and you will get the job because the interviewer liked you or something. Or you could try and go, most ascended possible route that you can and try to get a job. But on a certain level, like, what does an archangel know about a job? What do these like ascended beings know about jobs? They don't really have to think about that. And so maybe the way that they would have to interpret that request and accomplish that request for you is to, purge your soul of all of the stains of scarcity and create in you the perfect sense of serene, holy abundance to the point that the job just comes to you. But it's like, maybe that's going to take your whole life. Maybe you're going to die before you can do that. And so there are ways to get to a certain endpoint that can come from a more or less holistic perspective. And to me, that's a big difference in the way that you can approach these different entities in an occult practice. And I'm just going to drop that bomb, and unfortunately, my time's limited tonight, and I do have to run. But I will be.
Okay. Well, before you go, well, okay, I'm going to have to cut
Yeah,
this
go ahead.
out of the recording. Next week I'll be traveling, so I won't be able to have this, and then we'll have to find another time and day for this.
Okay.
So let's think about it. Think about a good time. This time, the actual 3 p.m. Eastern is good, but not the day. So let's think about that. But thanks
All
for
right.
joining, Matt.
Of course, thanks for having me. I'll see you next time, whenever that happens to be. And I will eagerly listen to the rest of this recording because I do want to hear. I think that we're on an interesting thread. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Good deal. Bye.
Yeah, I really like the idea that Matt brought up there about the holistic, because as I kind of have alluded to, when I've been interacting with these things, it is, I always use the term atomized. I honestly don't even know if that's the right word, but it's focused on a particular aspect, you know, and to use the Ars Goetia again as an example, when you look at the demons that exist within it, they all have particular skills. You know what I mean? I've got a copy right here. I'm just opening it up to a random page, and you know, okay, Andre Alphus, he can teach geometry perfectly. He maketh men subtle therein, and in all things pertaining unto menstruation or astronomy. He can transform a man into the likeness of a bird, which I've not experienced personally. But, you know, all of these demons have particular aspects of life that they are, you know, rulers of, I suppose. And I do, I guess, understand the idea that, like, they are made kind of unnecessary through that holistic ascension. As Matt was saying, you have the, like, if you purify yourself to the, you know, whatever that he exactly said in that spiel. It allows you to rise above that. It allows you to rise above the need for that. Which I think that this has been actually quite an important little realization in my own journey, because, like, I do use this stuff, you know what I mean? Like, it is a part of my practice, and that is because of, I suppose, the fact that I'm stuck in the material. You know what I mean? This is a skill that I have, you know what I mean? I like to think pretty good at it. Anyways, I'm sure that there are people that would definitely disagree with that, but, like, in my own context, at least, like, it is a skill that I have, you know what I mean? And I use the skills that I have to push my life forward. And a big part of my entrance into Neoplatonism as a whole has been, how do I push myself forward in a way that is safe and in a way that serves me? That's always terminology that I like to use. Does this thing serve me? You know what I mean? Because I think that ascension always serves us. I think that it's inherently good, you know? I just don't know if that's what I've been doing a lot of the time. Which, you know, is an important thing to realize, I think.
Well, the nice thing about Iamblichus and the theurgic framework is that it does have, obviously, the holism is almost built into it.
Yeah.
The goal towards a higher purpose is built into it. So every ritual that you would do is geared towards the ultimate goal of either becoming one with the one and becoming one with what the one's purpose is, which is supposedly the salvation of the human soul would be one purpose. Another purpose is to help others attain their own salvation. And material things are not inherently evil if they are geared towards those goals. So, Proclus, another theurgist, can talk about material welfare as a good. I mean, I think it's a Christian, almost monastic thought and way of thinking about material riches and goods. They're all good if you turn them over to the church, but they're not good if they serve your own purpose. But I mean, your own purpose being, again, in a theurgic framework, which is the goal of saving your own soul, and then ultimately helping to fashion the universe and the cosmos in such a way that it can reach its own salvation, as in other human beings having their own salvation and reaching their salvation.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, to kind of focus on that idea of wealth, and because that's something that I struggle with quite a bit, because wealth for me has always had kind of an inherent connection with, as I've said, like what I would call the left-hand path, the self-served path. But if I really think about, like, if I was rich enough that I would never have to work again, what would I do with that? Well, I would become a full-time magician. I would just do this all the time,
Exactly, right?
Would that be bad?
No,
I don't think it would be. It's not. In fact, I think it would probably be good. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a circle that I haven't squared yet. It's something that I struggle with a little bit, because, like I say, and like, if I'm being frank with you, a lot of the, like, more goetic stuff that I have had success with too is about material stuff, and it's because it's, as I said, it's a tool that I've used. It's something that I've found effective, and it really isn't part of that broader journey. Yeah, I don't know.
I think that I think it can be. I mean, I don't know whether you would use the same entities.
Yeah,
Because
I mean, that's also
I think
probably,
it would depend on the entities and what their goals are. I mean, certainly there have to be entities which are geared towards getting you wealth, and so that you can accomplish a better goal. Than just the wealth itself, or I mean, I think you have to bring the traditional virtues at some point into play with, at least for the Neoplatonists. They're going off the notion of really, the traditional notion of virtues as being what makes you ultimately happy. If you're a virtuous person, that means that you're ultimately happy, right? So, if these entities can make you better in exhibiting those virtues, then that's all for the good.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's just about working with the right things. And actually, I've been thinking a lot about what Farzana said last week too. About, like, and I mean, obviously, like, I don't come from the same religious background as her. Like, I have, like, she's able to conceptualize the one very easily, I think, with her background in Islam, But when she said, she's like, why would I worry about the lower when, like, I already have my, like, I think she said the one I love. I think that's the word she used. Like, why would I do that? And then that got me really thinking a lot, like, well, why do you? Why do I? Why am I doing this? Yeah, and I mean, I don't really have an answer for you, but it's an important thing to think about, especially if you're someone that's in my perspective where like you are practicing these things and you have also had some pretty off-putting experiences.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I thought about what she said as well, and I don't know that I have the final answer, but I think I have a preliminary, at least to me, I had a preliminary thought about why these entities would still be important. And it all comes back to being human. I mean, certainly in certain forms of Islam, it was not unheard of to not worship, but venerate saints. And, there were also some very, very occult versions of Islam as well, but they were persecuted out of existence. So I think that if one thinks of these as entities which are going to help you towards envisioning, attaining, help you take steps towards the one, it's not as though the one is not participating in that. It would be that those are the things that the one would want you to participate in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that when Iamblichus is talking about prayer, and he's talking about the rituals of theurgy, he's not thinking that, well, I'm doing this because I'm being wedded to this entity per se. Those are only measures that I use on my way to purification, so that I can become pure enough that I can become one with the one ultimately. It's basically because we're human and we have to use these entities to purify ourselves so that they can teach us how to purify ourselves, and then they can reveal the knowledge that they have on the path to the one. Because we are human, it does take. It's not as though we have the tools as we are born most of the time, unless we're of course reincarnated. But usually we don't, so we have to purify ourselves. And these entities allow us to be purified at the same time that they reveal the knowledge that we require to move on.
That makes me think about, and it's really a question, love to hear your thoughts on it. Do you think that the higher entities are also aiming towards ascension for the one? Or are they purely are they purely acting as bridges for us as humans?
Mm-hmm.
Because I always think about the idea of like long time and the ultimate sort of reunification of all, which implies to me that the higher beings as well desire that unity and are pushing towards it. Are they just beings that have gotten further along the process? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Or are they also grasping? Or sorry, no. Are they grasping beings that are further along in the process? Or are they kind of infrastructure in the cosmos that allows us as souls to ascend?
I do believe that he thinks that we have a place, and that the gods and daimons, heroes, etc., have a place, and they perform a function. So I like the notion that you have. They form the framework of the one.
Right.
And as the one is attempting to accomplish this higher purpose, which is really kind of general and almost unformed, except the idea that it wants to accomplish the salvation of the human soul. And the human soul as such, or matter as such,